in the fading silence of the 20th century's bloodiest conflict, a darker record still lies buried beneath the ashes of official history. Across Europe, entire divisions vanished without trace, coded transmissions pulsed from empty oceans, and governments quietly rewrote archives to seal what could never be explained. Between the front lines and the Cold War's uneasy dawn, a network of unacknowledged operations took root. Convoys that never existed, experiments erased from files, names struck from service rolls. Decades later, the fragments resurface, weathered manifests, encrypted field logs, voices trapped in tape reels. Each discovery pulls the curtain back on a war that never truly ended. One fought not for territory, but for secrecy itself. Chapter 1. The Ghost Convoy of the Baltic Sea. In the final months of the Second World War, the Baltic Sea had become a graveyard of shattered steel. Between February and May 1945, as the Red Army closed its grip on East Prussia, the Kriegsmarine scrambled to evacuate civilians, wounded soldiers, and precious cargo through the icy waters. Official records document Operations Hannibal and Waldfest, but one operation, Edelweiss, appears in no naval logs, no dispatches, and no after-action reports. For decades, historians assumed it was a myth whispered among sailors. Then, in 1998, a fragment of a Soviet naval cipher book recovered from a Helsinki archive revealed something different. A reference to Convoy Edelweiss, Abfahrt Pillau, 7. März 1945, Priorität Rot. According to decrypted passages, Convoy Edelweiss was composed of 3 vessels under heavy Kriegsmarine escort, the Greifswald, the Drach, and the Weserland. Each ship had been retrofitted with reinforced cargo holds and lead-lined compartments. British SIGINT units stationed in Bletchley Park intercepted unusual encrypted messages during that same week, referencing Project Morgenröte, a classified transfer initiative connected to the Reich's nuclear and propulsion research. The term appeared only once, then vanished from all subsequent communications. It was enough to attract the attention of Section 5 of MI6, which assigned a shadow observer to monitor German naval frequencies out of Kiel. His final report, filed under Circular 88, noted, repeated encrypted tone bursts detected, frequency 5.58 MHz, consistent with convoy identification. Pattern ceases abruptly on 10th of March. No further contact. The official fate of the convoy is listed as lost at sea, likely sunk by Soviet submarines patrolling near Gotland, yet no wreckage has ever been found. In 1962, during a NATO sonar exercise codenamed Operation Frostline, US and Swedish forces detected metallic signatures on the seabed, 3 aligned hulls resting more than 120 meters below. Classified imagery taken by Swedish submersibles showed structural designs inconsistent with any known Kriegsmarine class. What unsettled analysts most was the precision of their arrangement, as if deliberately positioned. The Soviets immediately filed a protest, claiming the discovery site was within their maritime boundary and cordoned off the area under the pretext of hydrological research. By 1974, declassified British cables revealed that divers from HMS Reclaim had been dispatched covertly to the Baltic, operating without NATO acknowledgement. Their unofficial mission objective: retrieve artifacts of intelligence value. One diver, Petty Officer Thomas Heller, later debriefed by the Defense Intelligence Staff, reported sealed crates still chained to the cargo deck of one wreck. The markings, he recalled, were faint but legible, black stenciled letters reading U-Uran 2354, Berlin Tegel. Within hours of the report, Heller was reassigned, and all dive footage was seized under the Official Secrets Act. He died in a road accident 2 weeks later, his statements formally redacted from naval archives. Across the Iron Curtain, Soviet intelligence was conducting its own inquiry. A KGB memorandum, dated 1965, uncovered from the Lubyanka archives after the collapse of the USSR, references an internal debate between Naval Command and the First Chief Directorate. The subject: recovery of German nuclear cargo, Baltic shelf operation not authorized by Politburo. The file contained partial reconnaissance photos, blurred, grainy, but showing what appeared to be metallic canisters embossed with the Reichsadler. Accompanying notes mention British intervention prior to recovery and evidence of preemptive removal. The implication was clear: someone else had reached the convoy first. Decades later, Independent maritime researcher Dr. Klaus Meinhardt pieced together a sequence of declassified British and Soviet signals intelligence logs. His conclusion was that Edelweiss was not a transport convoy, but a cover, part of a deeper operation to smuggle scientific personnel and documentation out of Europe before Germany's collapse. Among the names rumoured to be connected were Dr. Hans Richter, an engineer associated with magnetodynamic propulsion studies, and SS Obergruppenführer Erich Kammler, the architect of secret weapons facilities across the Reich. Both disappeared in the spring of 1945, presumed dead. Yet British records from 1948 refer obliquely to high-value maritime extractions and post-war technical debriefings under limited clearance. No locations, no identities, just initials, HR and EK. By the 1980s, fragments of this mystery resurfaced through West German parliamentary inquiries into missing wartime assets. A leaked Bundesnachrichtendienst report mentioned a compromised maritime transfer involving uranium oxide and prototype blueprints. The document's closing paragraph, since reclassified, carried a chilling remark. Suggest termination of inquiry, materials transferred under Operation Eclipse oversight. 1945. Eclipse was the code name for the Allied occupation directive governing post-war asset seizures. In other words, the convoy's disappearance may have been intentional, an erasure sanctioned by both sides to bury evidence of shared complicity. In 2009, Swedish oceanographers scanning for unexploded ordnance in the Baltic accidentally captured sonar imagery that reignited the legend. The data showed a formation of 3 wrecks, partially covered by sediment, aligned precisely north-south, as if arranged for retrieval. A privately funded expedition attempted to locate the site again, but government restrictions closed the area, citing environmental hazards. One of the researchers involved later described an unmarked naval vessel intercepting them and ordering immediate withdrawal. The only communication transmitted during the encounter was a single radio phrase. Edelweiss confirmed. Maintain silence. Today, fragments of this file remain sealed in both London and Moscow. Freedom of information requests citing the Public Records Act have been denied on grounds of national defence. Relevance. Independent historians who gained limited access to naval manifests note that the names of Greifswald, Kandrach, and Weserland were retroactively removed from official registries sometime between 1946 and 1951. The signatures approving those alterations belong to officers later employed in NATO intelligence and the emerging US atomic energy program. Whether convoy Edelweiss sank beneath the Baltic or was quietly intercepted and dismantled remains unknown. What endures is the silence, the deliberate absence of record, the careful pruning of evidence, the vanished trails of men and machines once thought lost to history. For every official denial, a classified cross-reference exists, stamped unverifiable, but persistent. Beneath the ice and shifting tides of the Baltic lies not just a graveyard of ships, but the submerged outline of a secret that refuses to rest. Somewhere within the grey archives of both East and West, the truth about Edelweiss still flickers between redacted lines, a ghost convoy that carried not just cargo, but the unfinished burden of a war that never fully ended. Chapter 2. Operation Harpstring, the Forgotten Frequency War. In January 1943, deep within the Harz Mountains of central Germany, Allied intelligence began intercepting a peculiar radio signal. It appeared on shortwave bands between 14.2 and 15.6 Mhz, just beyond standard military channels, and carried no discernible code. The signal was rhythmic, almost musical. Long pulses in repeating sequences, accompanied by faint harmonics that distorted nearby communications. RAF listening stations in Yorkshire and Swedish cryptographic units in Stockholm both logged the anomaly. The British codenamed it Signal 61F. 2 years later, after the fall of Berlin, captured German documents revealed its true origin. Operation Harpstring, an experimental communications program run by the SS, Scientific Directorate under the command of Obersturmbannführer Dr. Viktor Kappel. The Harpstring facility was located beneath a camouflaged industrial complex near Blankenberg, concealed behind munitions factories belonging to IG Farben. It operated under the cover of the Funkmessstelle Südharz, a radio calibration station ostensibly used for Luftwaffe radar testing. According to fragments of captured memos, Harpstring's purpose extended far beyond radar. The project aimed to explore low-frequency resonance patterns capable of altering neurological perception. In plain terms, weaponized frequency transmission designed to disrupt cognition or communication across enemy lines. Internal designations referred to neurologische Wellenfelder, or neuro-wave fields. When American forces entered the Harz region in April 1945, they were instructed by the OSS to secure any sites connected to advanced communications research. On April 17th, a reconnaissance platoon of the 3rd Armored Division discovered the Blankenberg complex abandoned. The surface buildings were empty, yet electrical systems remained active. Beneath a reinforced blast door, they found an elevator shaft descending nearly 200 feet into a subterranean tunnel network. What the soldiers found below was described later by Corporal James E. Riley as an operational bunker, still humming. Generators ran at full capacity, but every file cabinet was stripped clean. Every logbook removed. In the main chamber stood a massive coil assembly, 7 meters high, wired to a series of oscilloscopes still flickering green. The central control panel bore a brass plaque stamped SS Forschungsabteilung, Project Harpstring 1944. Captured technicians from nearby facilities claimed that the station had been evacuated days earlier under direct SS orders. They spoke of sealed transports heading south toward Bavaria, carrying unknown cargo marked with the letters VK-12. None of the trains were ever officially recorded. OSS Field Report 2109B, dated April 22, 1945, summarized the find as incomplete, highly advanced, of possible psychological operation significance. The equipment was dismantled and shipped to Camp King in Oberursel, later a center for post-war interrogation and scientific debriefing. By the time it reached the United States under Operation Paperclip, most of the original technical documents had vanished. In the early years of the Cold War, similar frequency anomalies began to reappear, this time from Soviet territory. Between 1950 and 1952, American monitoring posts in Turkey and Japan recorded Harpstring-type emissions originating near Riga, Tallinn, and Vladivostok. These signals, coded by the NSA as Project Winterbeam, shared the same harmonic signatures as the wartime German transmissions. Internal CIA memoranda from 1953, later declassified under the Freedom of Information Act, reference Soviet adoption of low-frequency entrainment methods, consistent with recovered German prototypes. The documents link this to a broader program investigating behavioral interference. Technologies, a phrase that would quietly evolve into MKUltra research less than a decade later. By 1967, the mystery of Harpstring deepened when British military engineers reviewing World War II radar archives discovered a missing set of blueprints catalogued under FMS H04YYs. The files, supposedly destroyed in a warehouse fire, reappeared in a US Air Force technical manual labeled Unattributed Source Material. The accompanying notes bore Capel's initials. Further analysis confirmed that the Harpstring coil design matched early American experiments at Fort Detrick involving resonant, electromagnetic influence on living tissue. The connection was undeniable. What began in an SS bunker in the Harz Mountains had quietly shaped the foundation of psychological warfare research for both East and West. One of the few surviving scientists from the program, Dr. Helmut Drexler, was tracked down in 1971, living under an assumed identity in Buenos Aires. In an interview recorded by investigative journalist Franz Reiter, Drexler claimed that the Harpstring signal was never intended as a direct weapon. It was meant as communication, he said, to send messages that bypassed language. But it became something else when the SS realized what it could do. According to Drexler, the final experiments conducted in February 1945 involved exposure tests on prisoners at the Mittelbau-Dora camp. Prolonged transmission caused disorientation, auditory hallucinations, and in some cases, fatal cerebral hemorrhage. When pressed about the results, Drexler refused further comment, only adding, "It didn't stop in 45, they just changed the uniforms." After Drexler's death in 1973, the Argentine police confiscated several of his belongings, including a radio receiver modified for low-frequency scanning. Among his papers was a torn envelope stamped Camp King, 1946, and a schematic titled Resonator MK2, Derived Type A. Forensic comparison later confirmed the handwriting to be Capel's. The US State Department denied any connection, labeling it coincidental archival overlap. Yet within intelligence circles, Harpstring had become a whispered cautionary tale, a program so strange and ethically corrosive that neither side wanted to claim ownership. The last known reference appears in a declassified NSA intercept from 1981. It describes a Soviet trawler operating near the Baltic Sea transmitting low-frequency bursts consistent with historical Harpstring modulation. The message ends abruptly. Interference ceased after 43 seconds. No vessel sighted. Possible equipment malfunction. After that, Harpstring disappears again into silence. What remains of the program is a handful of cables, some scattered blueprints, and the recurring hum caught on obsolete recordings, an echo of a war fought not with bullets, but with frequencies. In the static between history's transmissions, one can almost still hear it, a faint pulse repeating beneath the noise, a reminder that the boundaries between war, science, and control were far thinner than anyone dared admit. Operation Harpstring may have ended in the tunnels of Blankenberg, but its resonance continues to ripple through every era of hidden warfare that followed. Chapter 3: The Prague Extraction and the Vanished Spies. In early May 1945, Prague was a city suspended between liberation and annihilation. The German command still held the castle and radio district, while Soviet and Czech insurgents fought block by block for control. Amid that chaos, an American OSS unit operating under diplomatic cover initiated one of the last covert missions of the European theatre. The operation had no official name in Allied logs. In later fragments of declassified correspondence, it was referred to only as the Prague Extraction. What began as a race to intercept a fleeing SS convoy carrying critical intelligence would end with an entire team erased from existence. Captain Edwin Mallory, a 31-year-old field officer from Virginia, led a 6-man detachment attached to OSS Bern under orders from Colonel James Warburg. Their assignment, per a memorandum dated May 3, 1945, was to secure by any means necessary archival materials in transit from the German Foreign Office. Presumed origin Berlin Tiergarten, destination Prague Castle. The materials, coded Sonderfracht K40C, were believed to contain microfilm documents detailing wartime diplomatic negotiations between elements of the Reich and Western representatives seeking conditional surrender. Mallory's detachment entered the city disguised as Red Cross workers using forged Swiss papers, eyewitness accounts, collected decades later from Czech resistance veterans, describe a small convoy of jeeps travelling along the Kutná Hora road on the night of May 6th, just hours before the Prague uprising reached its peak. One survivor, then a teenage partisan named Gigi Horak, recalled that the Americans spoke little, carried sealed crates, and seemed to fear the sky. At 03:15, gunfire erupted in the forest near Malyshev. Locals reported the sound of automatic weapons and explosions lasting nearly 20 minutes. When Soviet armoured units reached the site 2 days later, they found only a burned-out jeep, spent .45 caliber casings, and an empty steel container labelled K47. No bodies were recovered. The first mention of Mallory's disappearance appears in OSS message traffic to Bern, dated May 12th, flagged Priority Black. The cable reads simply, Team Trident missing, extraction incomplete, potential compromise. It would be the last official transmission regarding the unit. In the following months, post-war reporting committees tasked with cataloguing Allied intelligence losses omitted the Prague team entirely. Their personnel files were marked inactive and sealed under Directive 990. Family members were informed that the men were missing during transitional operations. Only one anomalous note was added in red, penciled to Mallory's file. Do not reopen. Foreign custody suspected. For nearly 50 years, the story might have remained buried had it not been for the fall of the Iron Curtain. In 1991, newly declassified Czech State Security Archives revealed a thin folder marked Case 2427, American Agents, May 1945. Inside were 5 translated field reports from NKVD liaison officers stationed in Prague. The reports referenced an American reconnaissance unit operating outside formal Allied command, intercepted near Kutná Hora by unknown hostiles in German uniform. The final entry dated May 10th stated, no confirmation of deaths, recovered container passed to Moscow by rail, contents sealed under Order 731B. The K47 microfilm, it seemed, had survived. Cross-referencing Soviet and American archives, investigative historian Ilya Novikov discovered a second thread. In a declassified GRU memo from 1947, K-47 was listed among strategic recovered materials from European front, diplomatic correspondence, private industry negotiations, and scientific collaboration data. Within that same memo appeared a line redacted in every subsequent copy, but partially reconstructed through carbon bleed. Evidence of Allied pre-armistice communications with redacted for transition to post-war industrial cooperation. The implication was devastating. K-47 might have contained proof of secret Allied discussions with Nazi intermediaries before Germany's surrender. What happened to Mallory and his team after the ambush remains speculative. One theory, supported by OSS veteran testimony, suggests that Soviet counterintelligence captured the survivors and transported them to Moscow for interrogation. A 1951 CIA debriefing of a repatriated American prisoner from Vorkuta prison camp referenced 2 English-speaking officers held separately, claimed to have served in Prague under OSS orders. The names were never given, but the description of one, slight build, blue eyes, southern accent, matches Mallory's personnel record. In 1968, a US State Department official named Harold Kent received an anonymous parcel postmarked from Vienna. Inside was an aged envelope containing a single yellowed page. Typed in faded ink were the words, Sonderfracht K-47 secured, compromised, EM, Mallory's initials. Forensic analysis confirmed the paper stock dated to the 1940s, and the typewriter model matched the Underwood used by OSS Bern. Yet no fingerprints were found, and the origin of the letter was traced to a dead drop address previously used by Cold War intelligence couriers. The contents of K-47 have never been disclosed. Some speculate it held evidence of secret industrial transfers through neutral Switzerland, linking American corporations to wartime German research. Others believe it documented the first tentative contacts between Western intelligence and Soviet representatives negotiating the post-war partition of Europe before Yalta. Whatever truth it contained, the file disappeared into Soviet archives for nearly half a century. When journalists requested access in the 1990s, the Russian Ministry of Defense responded that no such file exists. In 2002, declassification researchers discovered a cryptic reference within an internal NSA memo, Project Glasswire, describing real K-47 recovered via proxy exchange 1947. The memo's context remains unclear, but its existence hints that the microfilm may have resurfaced briefly during a post-war intelligence swap. Within months, that section of the archive was reclassified again under national security exemption. Today, all that remains of the Prague extraction are fragments, scorched field maps retrieved from Czech police archives, a photograph of Mallory's detachment taken in Bern 2 weeks before departure, and the single letter bearing his initials. The photograph shows 6 men standing beside a Willys Jeep, all in civilian attire. On the crate behind them, someone scrawled in chalk, K-47, priority. The negative was stamped OSS 5 March 3 and 45, then filed away and forgotten. The official record concludes with silence. Yet in the corridors of intelligence agencies on both sides of the Atlantic, the name Mallory surfaces in whispered briefings whenever questions arise about missing post-war transfers. Even now, nearly 80 years later, historians still search for the trail of Sonderfracht K-47, an object whose contents could redefine the motives of victory itself. The Prague extraction remains an open wound in the fabric of espionage history. An operation never acknowledged, a team never found, and a message that somehow crossed decades to remind both victors and victims alike that truth, in war, is the first and last casualty. Chapter 4: Red Mercury and the Siberian Vault. The official story of the Red Army's advance through Eastern Europe in 1945 is one of liberation and victory. Yet buried within Soviet archives lies evidence of a secret operation that had nothing to do with liberation and everything to do with possession. The operation, conducted under the codename Eisenfaust, Iron Fist, targeted one of the last surviving scientific convoys fleeing Czechoslovakia for Austria. It was led by elements of the First Ukrainian Front, under orders not from the Stavka, but from the NKVD's Scientific Technical Department. Its cargo was listed only as Chemisches Spezialgut, chemical special goods. What the Soviets seized would become the foundation of one of the Cold War's deepest enigmas, red mercury. The records that survived are scattered and contradictory. One Soviet field log, recovered from the Central Archive of the Ministry of Defense in Podolsk, reports the seizure of a German military train near Brno on May 12, 1945. Among the captured equipment was sealed steel, containers bearing the Reich Ministry of Armaments, insignia and the cryptic label Rot Quecksilber 0.93. Chemical analyses conducted in a Moscow laboratory 2 months later described the substance as dense, metallic, non-reactive, of extraordinary isotopic composition. The results were classified immediately. The containers were transferred to a secret storage facility north of Novosibirsk, under KGB jurisdiction, known only as Object 17. Object 17 was built during the late war years as a prototype ammunition plant, but was converted by the NKVD in 1946 into a restricted vault for foreign technological materials, buried more than 50 meters beneath permafrost. The complex consisted of 3 reinforced tunnels sealed by hydraulic gates. Its blueprints, declassified in fragments during the Yeltsin era, indicate radiation shielding and decontamination chambers far beyond what was typical for chemical storage. The site's designation later appeared in KGB expenditure ledgers between 1948 and 1962 under the innocuous heading Meteorological Data, Reserve. There is no mention of red mercury, yet all entries correspond precisely to Object 17's coordinates. According to testimony from retired Colonel Sergei Denikin, who served as an NKVD transport officer in the late 1940s, the initial shipment from Brno to Siberia consisted of 5 canisters weighing approximately 48 kilograms each. They were escorted by armed guards in sealed wagons. No one knew what was inside, Denikin recalled in a 1993 interview, only that it had to reach Novosibirsk intact. Orders came from Moscow, signed by Beria himself. Denikin described being present when the containers were lowered into the vault. The scientists wore lead aprons and rubber gloves. They called it the substance that burns cold. We were told to forget what we saw. By 1952, the compound's code name appeared in a classified correspondence between the KGB's Technical Directorate and the Ministry of Medium Machine Building, the organization responsible for the Soviet nuclear program. The letter referenced Subject RM2, high-density isotope catalyst, possible fission enhancer. In Western intelligence circles, RM2 would later be mistranslated and sensationalized as red mercury, a material rumored to be capable of enabling compact nuclear reactions. Most physicists dismissed it as myth, yet declassified CIA intercepts confirmed that US analysts tracked the Soviet program with increasing alarm. In one 1956 NSA summary, an anonymous author notes, RM research indicates non-conventional nuclear pathway. Data origin traced to captured German Convoy, May 1945. The deeper the records go, the stranger they become. In 1963, a catastrophic event was reported at Object 17. A classified internal memo describes thermal anomaly and uncontrolled field fluctuation during an experiment labeled E-point phase 3. The incident allegedly killed 12 technicians and forced the sealing of one of the 3 main vault chambers. For the next 26 years, Object 17 remained dormant, marked on military maps as a decommissioned meteorological site. When inspectors from the International Atomic Energy Agency were granted limited access after 1989, they found extensive structural collapse, flooded tunnels, and elevated electromagnetic readings, but no trace of radiation. The official Soviet statement claimed the vault had been emptied for relocation in 1968. Where it was relocated, no one could confirm. Fragments of the sealed Soviet-era files suggest the material had been quietly transferred west in the 1980s, possibly as part of an unauthorized scientific exchange. A 1987 East German Stasi memorandum discovered after reunification mentions Operation Herbstlicht, the movement of a special energy compound from a Siberian research facility to Dresden for testing under the supervision of an institute linked to the Soviet Academy of Sciences. The file abruptly ends with the note, "Delivery confirmed by contact Vogel. Package handover completed November 3, 1988. Vogel's true identity remains unknown, but his codename appears again 6 months later in a report filed by the Bundesnachrichtendienst about a defector carrying unusual metallic ampules across the Czechoslovak border. Modern analysts, Reviewing these records have attempted to identify what Red Mercury could have been. Some speculate it was a byproduct of German heavy water research from the Czechoslovak uranium mines near Jakimov. Others argue it was an early plasma stabilizer derived from mercury-antimony oxide mixtures used in radar or propulsion experiments. Whatever it was, the substance's presence in both Soviet and later Western classified materials suggests it existed, at least long enough to vanish deliberately. In 1991, following the failed coup in Moscow, a group of investigative journalists gained temporary access to regional KGB facilities before files were reclassified again. One, Viktor Naumenko, photographed a half-burned ledger referencing Object 17 inventory check. 14 May 1968, shipment RM2, 4 units, 1 missing. On the facing page, in faint pencil, were the words, Berlin recipient confirmed. Weeks later, Naumenko's apartment was ransacked. He fled Russia, resurfaced in Prague in 1994, and disappeared 2 years later without trace. Satellite imagery from 2008 shows the remnants of Object 17, collapsed tunnels, exposed concrete arches, and what appears to be a single sealed blast door still intact beneath layers of frost. Attempts by independent explorers to reach the site have been blocked by Russian security forces, citing environmental restrictions. The region remains off-limits, designated as a protected hydrological zone. No government acknowledges Red Mercury's existence today, yet leaked correspondence between Russian and Belarusian defense ministries in 2012 referenced legacy RM, materials recovery operations, and Western intelligence. Sources quietly confirmed renewed interest in so-called dense isotopic catalysts, whether myth, misinterpretation, or remnant of a forgotten weapon. The story of Object 17 illustrates how far nations will go to bury what they cannot explain. In the darkness beneath Siberia's frozen soil, the ghosts of Operation Eisenfaust and its mysterious cargo endure, locked away not by ice, but by intent. The file remains sealed, and the vault, though long abandoned, may still hold whatever truth the victors of 1945 could never afford to reveal. Chapter 5. The Vienna Files. Shadows of Operation Paperclip. Vienna, May 1947. The war was over, but the city still bled from its wounds. Rubble filled the Ringstrasse, and the ruins of the Hotel Metropole, once the Gestapo's headquarters in Austria, loomed as a charred monument to terror. It was here, beneath the collapsed West Wing, that Allied engineers discovered a locked steel vault, untouched by the firebombing. Inside were filing cabinets marked Geheime Reichssache, Secret Reich Matter, and folders embossed with the Black Eagle seal of the Sicherheitsdienst. The discovery was reported to the Combined Intelligence Objectives Subcommittee, CIOS, under the reference File Vienna 027A. For reasons that remain unclear, the documents never reached London or Washington. What they contained would quietly vanish into the machinery of post-war intelligence, feeding a network of scientific and psychological programs that would come to define the Cold War. When US counterintelligence corps officers first examined the recovered material, they realized it was not a conventional Gestapo archive. Among the personnel records and interrogation logs were lists of scientists, physicists, chemists, and physicians, each annotated with red sigils labeled Sonderliste Files. Marginal notes referenced Projektdämmerung and Versuchsreihe Theta, experimental programs involving neurological interference, cellular acceleration, and induced cognition. Several of the names corresponded to individuals already targeted by the US Army's Operation Paperclip, which sought to extract German experts for American research. But others on the list were unknown, men and women who had supposedly died in 1945 or been captured by the Soviets. Their inclusion in Sonderliste Files suggested they had survived and were working under protection somewhere within the occupied zones. On June 2, 1947, British MI6 officer Major Harold Lytton arrived in Vienna to oversee the transport of the Vienna files to London for analysis. His report, now partially declassified, describes evidence of experimental cross-border cooperation between SS research divisions and foreign intermediaries between 1943 and 1945. Lytton never reached his destination. His aircraft, a RAF Dakota en route to RAF Lynham, exploded mid-flight over the Austrian Alps. Official cause: mechanical failure. The wreckage was recovered weeks later, but every document on board had been incinerated. Only fragments of charred paper were retrieved by Swiss rescuers. One fragment bore the words, Phase 2, Transfer USA completed. What followed was a coordinated silence. No official mention of the Vienna files appeared in Allied archives for nearly 2 decades. Yet in 1952, the newly formed CIA established Project Charioteer, a classified initiative studying neurological patterning for behavioral enhancement. Its research budget was drawn directly from the same fiscal pool that funded early paperclip assimilation. Internal memoranda, later uncovered through Freedom of Information requests, make reference to Sonderliste specialists currently active within secure facilities, Nevada sector. The names were redacted, but the origin point, Vienna 1947, was unmistakable. Among the surviving fragments of the Vienna files, preserved in microfilm duplicates smuggled out by a British clerk before the crash, were notes attributed to SS Sturmbannführer Dr. Friedrich Kerner, a neurologist affiliated with the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute. His report, Übertragung des Traumzustands, described induced dream states through chemical and electromagnetic stimuli using unwilling human subjects. Kerner's file ends abruptly in April 1945. Yet a 1958 US Air Force medical patent credited to F. Kerner, consultant, outlines similar methodologies for controlled hypnagogic response. The coincidence was officially dismissed, though contemporaneous correspondence between CIA and USAF medical branches reveals unease about the discovery. In 1964, a whistleblower from within West German intelligence leaked an internal circular to Der Spiegel, hinting at a hidden post-war scientific directorate operating beyond jurisdiction. The article was suppressed before publication, but a surviving proof listed several locations tied to Vienna-origin research assets, including Fort Detrick in Maryland and Groom Lake in Nevada. Within weeks, the whistleblower, a former Abwehr analyst named Otto Wexler, was found dead in his apartment. Cause of death, carbon monoxide poisoning. Local police ruled it suicide. The file was closed after 48 hours. The last confirmed reference to the Vienna files surfaced in a 1979 MI6 audit of legacy wartime assets. The entry reads, Item VF-27A, retained under joint custodial review with U.S. Defense Intelligence Agency. Status, restricted. Contents, experimental documentation, biological ethics risk. Shortly thereafter, a senior British archivist named Anne Keating resigned, citing ethical objections to continued concealment. In a private interview recorded years later, Keating stated, "The files were never about weapons. They were about control. What happens when science serves ideology, and ideology changes its flag?" In 1998, following partial declassification of paperclip materials, journalists uncovered the existence of a sealed facility in Nevada known internally as the Circle Annex. Personnel rosters showed several émigré scientists who had been presumed dead in Europe. Their immigration entries were forged, dated 1946 to 47. A recovered memo from the annex director reads, "Vienna cadre integrated successfully. Recommend full erasure of prior affiliations." Whether these individuals were the same ones listed on Sonderliste files remains unproven, but the timeline aligns perfectly with the disappearance of the Vienna files. Modern historians attempting to trace the original documents encounter only closed doors. British archives cite loss due to fire, while American repositories defer to classification under Executive Order 13292. The Soviet records, potentially containing parallel copies seized in 1945, remain sealed. Still, isolated evidence continues to surface. A torn file cover labelled Versuchsreihe Theta, found in a Czech private collection, a photograph of Kerner standing beside an American colonel, date-stamped 1951, and a microfilm reel discovered in a London estate sale bearing the inscription V Archive, Metropole Hotel. Each artifact points to a single unsettling conclusion. The knowledge once confined to Nazi laboratories did not die with the Reich. It was inherited, expanded, and quietly normalized beneath new banners. Today, the Metropole site is a memorial. Tourists walk past the stone pillars without knowing what once lay beneath. No plaque mentions the vault or the scientists whose names were erased. In the cold logic of intelligence history, the Vienna files represent the grey boundary where victory blurred into complicity. They are proof that when a war ends, the pursuit of power simply changes its vocabulary, from conquest to research, from ideology to national security. Beneath the language of progress, the shadows of Operation Paperclip still move, unacknowledged, in the flicker of classified light. There are stories that history refuses to exhume, files sealed not by time, but by intention. The Baltic still hides its ghost convoy. The Harz Mountains still hum with buried frequencies. The forests outside Prague whisper the names of vanished men. Beneath Siberia's ice, sealed vaults preserve what nations could never confess, while the corridors of modern research still echo with the unacknowledged legacy of Vienna's forbidden archives. Together they form a lattice of silence, fragments of a war that reinvented itself in the shadows of peace. And somewhere, in a locked drawer marked classified indefinitely, the next file waits to be found.